It's true. Across the globe, women aren't as prosperous as men. Gender inequality is a pressing moral issue, but we forget it has massive economic implications. If you were to put all of the women who don't have access to formal financial services in one place, they would make up the third largest country in the world. That means an entire population without bank accounts, credit cards, or other tools you and I likely benefit from daily. Prosperity for women starts with inclusive policies, products, and people around the globe, and the investment to make it happen. Welcome to the Making Finance Work for Women podcast. My name is Sonia Kelly, and I lead Women's World Banking's proprietary research division. Join me as I speak with changemakers around the globe to deconstruct the social and economic exclusion women face. We'll discover new evidence together and drive action to accelerate women's economic empowerment. Because a leg up isn't a handout, it's a global game changer. Welcome. And again, thank you for tuning into the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, now streaming on YouTube and available wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on YouTube, though, you'll be able to find additional insights and resources linked in the description of the video below. I'm the host of the show, Sonia Kelly, and I'm the global head of the Women's World Banking Institute. And before we get started, I'd like to give a special shout out to the sponsors of the Making Finance Work for Women podcast, Ernst & Young LLP. EY is a global leader working across assurance, consulting, law, strategy, tax, and transactions. EY teams ask better questions to find new answers for the complex issues facing our world today. You can visit ey.com to explore their latest insights and services. Now let's jump into the show. Today we're going to be discussing something that can't seem to get itself off the front page of the news: cryptocurrency. With all of the discussion of the potential of cryptocurrency to transform the monetary system, it's about time we discuss it further on the podcast. Now, cryptocurrency, if you've been living under a rock or if you just haven't asked the right questions yet, cryptocurrency is a form of digital currency that's secured by cryptography and built on blockchain technology. It allows peer-to-peer transactions without a central authority like a government or a central bank. So you can use cryptocurrency much the same way you can use any other currency, dollars or pounds or Naira. Now, Bitcoin is something I'm sure you've heard of. It was introduced actually more than 15 years ago. Can you believe it? It was the first cryptocurrency, and it demonstrated the concept of a decentralized digital monetary system. A centralized monetary system is like a monetary system that's controlled, again, by a government. But a decentralized one is one that's not controlled by a central source of power. And in the years since that launch of Bitcoin, the crypto ecosystem has exploded from a niche curiosity into a global phenomenon. The world has gone from just a handful of digital coins to over 9,000 active cryptocurrencies today. 9,000 different types of currency. Bitcoin is still just below half of market share. And this is such a current topic right now. Here are some of the headlines that I've read in the past couple of weeks. Okay, first, ex-Chancellor George Osborne says UK has been left behind in cryptocurrency boom. Here's another one. This one's a little clickbaity. No, it's not too late. Here's how to get cryptocurrency in 2025. Another one on the US side, how the Genius Act will affect crypto investors in the US. You may have heard of the Genius Act. There's also an article I saw called The Dark Side of Cryptocurrency. And then one that's more for people who don't really care about cryptocurrency for itself, but for its uses, cryptocurrency's growing role in travel. So again, it just feels like it's something that's coming up more and more. Now, by the end of last year, by the end of 2024, over 500 million people worldwide had owned or used cryptocurrency. Some governments have made Bitcoin legal tender. 80% of institutional investors plan to increase their crypto exposure. But let's talk through some use cases, because I think that's the most important part. We always want to be focusing on what finance does for people instead of just focusing on the mechanisms of finance itself. So the first use case I want to point out is remittances. The remittances market is enormous. So many people all over the world are sending so much money elsewhere. And moving money across borders is tremendously expensive. The global average of international remittances transfers is about 6.35% of the amount that people send. That average is higher for lower transactions, which lower income people tend to be more likely to send. And this volume is really large. In 2023, India received $125 billion in remittances, followed by Mexico at 67 billion, China at 50 billion, the Philippines at 40 billion, and so on. Now, cryptocurrency has the potential to bring this cost down to almost zero, because it is expensive to send money across borders because it has to go from one financial institution to some kind of a central authority that organizes all the financial institutions to another one in another country, in order to make that transfer. And so cryptocurrency is a really good solution to that because it doesn't really care about borders. A second use case is something we're seeing a lot, which is stable coins. The total supply of stable coins grew by about 28% year over year, with transfer volumes reaching approximately $27.6 trillion. A stable coin is a kind of cryptocurrency that's value is pegged to an existing more stable currency. So, like, for example, the US dollar. And so it's a way to get around using centralized currency without that risk of currency fluctuation. Another use case is saving services. Cryptocurrencies and tokenized contracts can transform personal and community-based savings for low-income women. It offers enhanced security, transparency, and potential for real interest earnings. A good example of this is there's something on Ethereum, which is another cryptocurrency, something called We Trust, where small groups have a rotating savings arrangement, and everybody puts in a little bit of money each week or month, but over a determined amount of time. Everybody puts in a little bit of money, and then somebody gets to take all of the money with them. So it's like, instead of saving up little bits over time, you give a little bit into the pot, and then somebody takes home the pot. And so there's this trusted lending circle on Ethereum called We Trust that does that. Let's talk about women's market share, because I think that's really important to the theme of our podcast and what we really care about at Women's World Banking. Women are only 37% of crypto owners worldwide, but that's not universal across markets. So, like in Vietnam, women are half of crypto owners. In India, 100 million women own cryptocurrency, making India home to the largest number of crypto owning women in the world. India is a particularly interesting example to me because India is a place where women do a lot of asset buildup through non-currency mechanisms. Like, they're not storing in Indian rupees. They're like buying things like gold, which are a store of value. And women in India seem to be using cryptocurrency as a store of value in the same way they would have used gold jewelry previously, which I think is a really interesting use case. With all of that preamble, and hopefully I've caught you up a little bit on some of the conversation, with all that preamble, I'd love to introduce you to our guest, Becky. Becky is a seasoned partner of EY Financial Services Consulting with nearly 2 decades of experience driving innovation across finance, operations, and technology. From launching digital banks to advising crypto-native businesses, Becky brings a global lens and sharp insight into how financial services are transforming in the digital age, which makes her perfect for our podcast. She's also an avid skier, global citizen, and mother of 2. Welcome, Becky Carvatt.
Thank you, Sonia. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Now, we always like to start our conversation by asking what your origin story is. Your bio says you're a global citizen, which really piqued my interest. Can you talk a little bit about that and how crypto came into the picture for you?
for sure. So I started my career at EY and I've been here for almost 20 years. And a lot of that is
Oh.
because I've had a really diverse background and I've had many jobs within one firm. As a consultant, you do travel a lot and you work all over the place. So I had some early opportunities to work in London and Europe as a young consultant
Hmm.
that really threw me in the deep end and challenged me and made me interested in a longer term opportunity. I got the opportunity to work out in Hong Kong from 2014 to 2020. And that was really where I first started getting exposed to some of the early work that was happening in the blockchain space.
Hmm.
Um, at the time in the US, we were sort of post financial crisis, Dodd Frank, all of our big financial services clients were dealing with the onslaught of regulation and the uplift of risk management and compliance that was happening. But fast forward to Asia, I land in Hong Kong, and it's all about emerging middle class and growth in
Hmm.
markets like China and Malaysia and ASEAN more broadly. Um, a lot of firms at that time were looking to launch new wealth focused products for that emerging middle class, and also looking at new ways to do things like payments or banking.
Hmm.
In the US, I think we were pretty spoiled at the time. We have a lot of different digital apps. UK also had a lot of open banking and apps at the time, but it was not super easy to get a bank account as, a white collar American in Hong Kong. You have to stamp and chop
Hmm.
and sign your signature the same way 7 times if you're going in to get a bank account. So some of my early work was focused on different projects across Asia, helping some of the early firms that were launching exchanges, protocols, or even work with governments. One of the first
Hmm.
projects that I had done when I was landed in Asia Pac, we had a client that was the Australian government. They had
Huh.
a seizure of assets that happened to include Bitcoin, and they needed help to take custody of those assets and then auction them off. If that was cash or even securities, that's a process that's pretty well oiled in most major governments. But they said, what do we do with Bitcoin? And so we took them through a process and found some vendors, and it was a really interesting first use case. You can look it up. The Financial Times wrote it up at the time.
Yeah, I'd love to include a link for that
For sure.
in the notes below, and I myself am gonna check it out to see what happened because I never thought about that, like, how do they how do you get cryptocurrency out of a decentralized system? So that'll that'll force people
We
to click
talk a
that
lot
link.
about, I mean, the US government has talked this year about how if they have a similar circumstance, they are going to then hold the assets if they are certain crypto assets. At that time, Bitcoin was about $9,000. So the Australian government could have made a nice a nice killing if they had held on to it at that point in time.
Yeah, that's true, that's true. Um, okay, well, I talked about the rise of cryptocurrency and it's just like it's not going away. I think 15 years
Mhm.
ago when Bitcoin came out, we thought it was a bunch of nerds doing math somewhere, like solving
Yes.
equations. And none of us understood it. And now it's just a fact of life. Like it's not going away. Can you talk a little bit about who stands to benefit most from emerging crypto technologies and who's at risk of being left behind on the other side?
I think there are a lot of folks that have benefited that were a part of that early cohort of nerds, mathematicians, hackers. And I think generally, especially as someone who's worked in financial services for my career, you see that that slants heavily male. Um, but when you look more broadly at who's learning about this technology, adopting this technology, and stands to benefit, there are a lot of opportunities if women can learn a bit more, be curious, and read and listen and learn. There's so much content available for both things like basic payments and support for typical retail financial services, but also as well as investing. Um, Access to various products, whether it's money movement cross border or even investment products, are increasingly more democratized through some of the startups that we're seeing in this space.
Hmm.
And I think as a lot of these use cases emerge, there's new ones all the time. What's really being created is a platform that allows for developers to launch products that focus on financial services. In in our prior world, kind of our Web 2 world, there are a lot of different barriers to launching even a fintech app. As someone who worked with some of our clients to build these and launch them, it's important to have regulation and compliance, but in a lot of cases, there are a lot of central authorities and significant funding barriers to even starting companies that can focus on these types of issues.
I wanna ask a couple of follow-up questions. First is you
Yeah.
mentioned Web 2. Can you explain what
hmm
Web 2 is?
Yes. So there's a great book, you can add this in the show notes, that Chris Dixon from Andreessen Horowitz put out called Read, Write, Own. And you think about Web 1, early internet is read. It was posted and you could look at it. It was like a message board. Web 2, you can write. I can post on Instagram, I can post
Mm,
on X, and I have the ability to create content. But generally, unless I have a significant following, I'm not monetizing it. I'm not owning. When I'm putting things out into the world on the internet today, I'm not really getting paid for it. I am the product.
mm,
Facebook and Instagram are getting paid for me. Um, but in the own environment, and we're seeing a lot of really interesting use cases come out here, when the base layer is programmable and includes money or ways to transact in value, you potentially
mm,
can have ownership over some of those assets. So that's Web 3. Um, Coinbase had some really interesting announcements in the last couple weeks on their base network. That's their layer two, about almost, a super app with different capabilities that your content is now yours and you can own it and you can potentially monetize it. There's some really
mm,
interesting creator economy use cases. And you think about professions where women are highly indexed, creative, the arts, music, and there's lots of different opportunities in a space where typically there's more centralized control over the value that women create. And I mean, men and
mm.
women in this space, but a lot of times women.
Yeah. So Web 2 is like when I go and open my web browser and I go to web pages and I read information, that's Web 2. And Web 3 is this world where ideas and art and music and anything can be assigned value. And we can kind of track and pay for those things or receive value from those things instead of just kind of putting them out as things to consume.
The value is a part of the protocol. In today's world, if I want to receive, I'm reading and I'm writing in Web 2. But if I want to receive value for that, I have to be an influencer. I have to have a
Mm,
contract. The value is divorced from the technology itself, where in Web 3, the value can be a part of it, can be a feature of the product. It is the
I
product.
see. Yeah, and that's all tracked, like, on the blockchain, and assumingly the value is conferred over cryptocurrency, which also operates on the same blockchain.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, my other follow-up question was, you mentioned the lack of gender diversity in the crypto space, and
Yes.
I'm picturing, like, all these crypto bros with their fleece vests walking around. Um, Look at us, a couple of women on a podcast talking about cryptocurrency, which is great. Do you see a greater trend toward diversity in the space of people talking about and working on crypto right now?
I think there's definitely a need for it. And, um, you know, reflecting back, there's lots of different opportunities that you connect with folks in this space that are, building and launching companies. And I think there's nothing more indicative of that we need more women, that when you go and see who's leading and running and on panels, usually it is heavily male.
Mm,
But I think one of the things that can be quite useful, it's not like there's no women in this space. I think it's about making sure that we elevate the thoughts and the successes of women in this space. So one of the things that I love to do, there's amazing women to follow that put out the best thought leadership. So some of the earliest and best podcasts in this space are put out by Laura Shin. She was previously at
mm,
Fortune. She runs her own podcast called Unchained for at least a few years now. And she goes deep But I think having women's voices elevated, there's a number of other folks now. Eleanor Terrett just left Fox News and she's got something called Crypto America. She's at the forefront of reporting the first thing that happens coming out of DC. There's a lot of amazing female founders like Caitlin Long. Um, and we've got a lot of female regulators too. Hester Pierce at the SEC, Caroline Fahm at the CFTC. And I
Mm,
think one of the best things, and frankly for me, what got me into this space was hearing female voices talking about the technology. It made it more relatable. When I first started learning
mm.
about blockchain and crypto, it was through tech bros and hackers when I was based in Hong Kong at a startup space called PMQ. And I remember saying, I don't know if I really, does this make sense to me? This is kind of weird. What is this? But when I heard a woman speak about it, it was someone who was working on an early zero knowledge proof protocol, which is a privacy blockchain, named Jane Lippincott. She went to A16Z crypto after that.
Mm,
Um, when I heard her explain it, it got me much more interested. And I think there was something about having that relatability, that really resonated with me. I think having more women and also more women sharing and coaching other women is super important. There's a number of
mm.
amazing affinity groups in this space as well that are doing great work to onboard women. SheFi, like DeFi, but SheFi, run by Maggie Love, is one of the best organizations that's working to educate women. Boys
Mm.
Club is another one, that has, a funny little play on words there, but trying to make crypto less of a boys club and more of a girls
I love
club.
that.
Yeah,
That's great. Yeah, I wanted to take Maggie's course, actually, the SheFi course at some point to sort of get smart on this. And so I'm glad you brought it up.
highly recommend. She's brilliant.
Mm. You mentioned that your way into understanding this was hearing somebody talk about privacy. And that's something we actually
Mhm,
talk a lot about at Women's World Banking. We talk about the fact that women have kind of preferences for their financial services. And one of those preferences is they want their financial services to be private. Because if you have less agency, you can
mhm.
use a financial service to keep your funds as your own, and you don't have to share them with other people. And so I know that you probably meant privacy in like a different way, maybe, but this
It's a
makes me
feature.
yeah, it is. It's a big feature and an attractive feature to women, I would guess. And so I'd love to get into the use cases question. I mentioned
Mhm.
remittances. I mentioned stablecoin. I mentioned savings, building up a useful lump sum of assets. Can you talk a little bit about the potential of crypto to solve the pain points that women users of financial services are feeling?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, maybe starting with privacy. I think there's there are many different, features of different blockchains and different cryptocurrencies, and privacy can be one of them. I think there's challenges with that sometimes when you think about financial crime and compliance with some of the global rules around BSA and AML, Bank Secrecy Act, anti-money laundering. Um, but to your point, in many cases, it can be a feature that's incredibly useful for women.
Mm,
So even just looking back, when my mom got married, she couldn't get a mortgage without my dad co-signing. We
mm,
only got the Equal Credit Opportunity Act in the US like 50 years ago.
yeah.
Um, and so when we think about how many women either have to have a man co-sign or even worse, just can't even get access to financial services, crypto and decentralized financial services offer something that can help connect them with ways to spend, save, remit, and protect their money. Um, there's, I think, a lot of different ways they can do that. So, in many cases, this could be that they're just able to sign up and they don't have, um, you know, the the male authority as a part of that. I think there's
Mm,
challenges there because in many cases that goes against the laws and rules of various countries. So you won't see major applications doing that. You'll usually see smaller startups and protocols
mm.
offering services that support. but I think you can gauge by adoption in different countries what's needed and perhaps fair. I think those are things that you debate maybe more from a regulatory perspective of what's appropriate.
Mm,
Um, in addition, because a lot of crypto is programmable, the ability to lend in many cases can be just built into the platform. There's significant amount of lending capability available in DeFi platforms today, like Aave, and these are very useful financial tools for micro lending or for larger lending.
mm,
Um, Another protocol, Morpho, which Coinbase built a lovely, beautiful front end on top of, allows you to lend against your Bitcoin. So
huh,
for women that are in this space, depending on the types of assets that they have and how they're looking to interact with them, everything from micro to macro, there's a lot of different options. I mean, less emerging markets and even privacy, even major markets. I think I'm in a lot of crypto moms and crypto women chats on Telegram, and you'd be surprised how many women either living an abusive situation
mm,
or again working to protect funds for themselves or their children that they're concerned about. There's a lot of areas where our traditional financial system might not be the best way to protect that, and there are definitely use cases in that space that even women in major markets are tapping into.
And now, a word from our sponsor. EY applauds Women's World Banking's 45-year legacy empowering women through financial inclusion. Together, we have a common vision to build a better financial services industry, one that is stronger, fairer, and more sustainable. Find out more on ey.com. Our CEO, Mary Ellen Iskandarian, she wrote a book about the huge market of women who don't have financial services. It's called Nothing Micro, about a billion women. And in that, she talks about the transformative impact of a woman having control over her money
Hmm.
and being able to make choices about that money. It's like, it sounds so simple, but it means she can prioritize her kids' schooling. She
Yeah.
can leave an unsafe situation if she needs to. She can leave a job that's kind of toxic if she needs to, and go somewhere else. And I think, you touched on some things that are really important there. You touched on the relational aspects of finance that sometimes are built into legal systems and sometimes are built into customs that can reduce women's agency or control over their money. Then you also talked about women's choices, but one thing that was implicit in something you just said was kind of a, I don't know, I felt like when you talk about like use cases, there's almost like a pride of ownership. Like, I wonder if women who own crypto are feeling like, I'm an asset owner. Like, I'm not just dealing
I
with,
figured it out.
dollars.
There's something,
Yeah.
it's getting better. The user experience is getting better, but it is, you got to learn a little bit because there
Mm.
are, um, risks that you can encounter that you have to mitigate against. I think,
Well, let's talk about those risks. Yeah,
yeah, for
I'd love
sure.
to get into that a little bit. Like, tell me more. Like, what are they? How can we watch out for them and mitigate them to ensure that it's a reliable tool for underserved women who might not have that, like, digital financial capability?
Yeah. So, I mean, in particular in DeFi, you're working with code. There's no like, let's go call the protocol and get my money back.
Hmm.
So, in particular, understanding how the technology works, understanding where the risks might be, doing things like sending a test transaction before you send a larger dollar transaction, really basic steps. I mean, in the
Hmm.
US, folks are familiar with Zelle. You can
Yeah.
missend a Zelle transaction and you probably can get on the phone and figure something out, but it has a really clear disclaimer, you can't get this money back if you send it the wrong way.
Hmm.
When I was in Hong Kong, if you type the wrong bank number, they have a similar sort of faster payment system to Zelle, but you've got to type a lot more numbers. And if there's a mismatch, it just floats off into the ether, and you've got to find a way to figure it out. In crypto,
Hmm.
if it's gone, it's gone, and that is where you've got to be thoughtful about where you're sending funds. When you're learning, a lot of places that people like to learn in crypto sometimes can venture into token gated communities on platforms like Discord. Lots of very interesting information and relevant information, but it's important to be vigilant when you're providing things like your wallet address to be able to access discussion boards or information, because there's a lot of very sneaky ways that hackers can access your information and potentially drain wallets. A lot of these
Mm,
are phishing scams, which require you to click on something and download something that's putting, bad software on your PC or your phone. But those are all things that I think awareness of basic phishing scams, of typical ways, typical exploits in crypto are important to understand. In the same way that, I know my mom keeps up on, what are they mailing today, that she might get a piece of fake mail that tells her to call a number and
mm,
gives away information. It's just different types of exploits, and it's a lot more technologically focused. So I think it's important to be thoughtful about that. A lot of firms that are developing tech in this space are definitely focused on that angle of
mm,
protecting customer funds, even providing some type of insurance. Coinbase does that now, depending on the type of account. And I think there's
mm,
going to be more of a trend when we look at even payments and global payments and remittances. In typical payments, there's guardrails for fraud and for other sort of risk management measures.
mm.
Visa, MasterCard, the banks, there's lots of players in this space that cover those costs today. So when you use your card and someone stole your number and put some charges on it, you have a place you call and you can get your money back. Today, with stable coins or other cryptos, there's not really a way to do that. But
Mm.
there's a lot of networks being launched now where potentially that could be on the future product roadmap. You see Stripe
Wow.
has really gotten into this space and they're working on their own layer one. Circle announced theirs this week, and they specifically highlighted that there are features in payment networks that don't exist in crypto that they like to put on a protocol that USDC
Oh,
Circle stablecoin would live on. So we haven't
huh.
seen this evolve yet, but I think the market realizes it's a need and it's potentially something that could get built for.
Oh, that's really exciting. I did not know that that was on the horizon. That'll solve, I think, a lot of challenges having to do with mistakes and fraud. Um, okay, well, you're a consultant. Uh, you work with a lot of companies, and I'd love to give you just a quick scenario. Like, let's say a company came to you, a financial services company, and said, we are really interested in starting to offer cryptocurrency to our market, but our market is like lower income people. We
Mhm.
serve mostly women. Um, if they asked you, like, how do we assess the readiness of this market to engage with crypto products? How would you advise them?
So I'm smiling and it's a great question because we are having this conversation multiple times a day, every day for the last 6 months, given all the
Oh,
traction in
wow.
the US with the Genius Act and now coming the Clarity Act. And I have a call right after this with another bank to have that same conversation. Um, Typically, the first steps that firms are taking are to evaluate what are their customers doing today. In some cases, we had a conversation with a community bank where they said, "Well, my customers aren't asking me about crypto today," and
Mhm.
that might not be the right answer. It might be that the customers are going elsewhere to transact in this space because they don't think the community bank has any sort of understanding or product offering in this space. So, what we're
Mm,
seeing a lot of firms look at is where are their ACHs going when they're going out of the financial institution? Um, there's a lot of worry and I think a lot of data now from many financial institutions that their younger cohort of customers, they're Gen Z, they're millennials, they're watching the ACHs go out to Robinhood, to Coinbase. Um,
mm,
Whether that's women or men, it's I think both. But there's a lot of lost deposits because younger generations want more digital products and they're excited about some of the offerings that exist out there that banks don't have for them today.
mm,
So, what we're seeing a lot of banks do is evaluate what are their customers most interested in? And you can do surveys to do that. You can also look at the data of how your customers are transacting. Um, and then many of them are forming strategies around what are the things I'd like to offer in this space? Does it make sense to open up something that would offer buy, sell, hold, transfer of a few basic cryptos as well as stablecoin? When we see stablecoin evolving, especially in the US, we're seeing it in the backbone behind some of our payment solutions. We're seeing a
Mm.
lot of community and regional banks that don't have global banking relationships and they're not great at offering cross border transfers, saying maybe this is a way that I could actually support my community that sends a lot of money
Mm.
overseas, but they don't use me today. They use MoneyGram or Western Union.
Which
Um,
has a higher interest rate than they would be able to
exactly.
offer if they were using stablecoin. Yeah.
Yeah, we're seeing fintechs like Remitly has just entered into the stablecoin space. That was an
Mm.
announcement last week.
Mm.
PayPal obviously has launched their stablecoin PYUSD. They also support a lot of global remittances as well as merchant acceptance and payments. So you think about
Mm.
small merchants and merchant acceptance. When you're running a small business, credit card fees eat into a lot of your profits. So if
Mm.
you're as a merchant paying $3 or 3% to accept certain cards, accepting stablecoin is much lower cost. And we're seeing a
Right.
lot of interesting experiments in this space. Coinbase did a big push around Bitcoin Pizza Day, where they had about 150 pizza shops in New York City using their base network and stablecoin to accept payments and kind of seeing, the difference and the impact that that can make. The challenge on the
Mm.
back end and what we're seeing now is this evolution of how quickly will we have a minimum viable ecosystem where a retail consumer wants to pay with a stablecoin, the
Mhm.
merchant wants to accept it, and there's a benefit there. There's a mutual benefit, and the merchant has something to do with it afterwards. They're not just converting it back to fiat currency. That loop hasn't happened yet, but when we see some of these major players in the merchant space like PayPal entering in
Yeah.
and really making a big global push, um, there's a lot of really interesting developments that I think will happen over the next year, and it's seriously accelerating. But I guess to go back to that financial services client, the bank, a lot of them are evaluating, and many are well on the path. You've seen a number of announcements, and we're working with a lot of them in this space to enable these capabilities. You've seen the big announcements from the broker dealers like Morgan Stanley, E-Trade, and Schwab, but
Mm.
also the regional banks like PNC. And they're all partnering. So they all have a digital native on the back end that they're working with to direct connect APIs and offer these services, whether it's a
Mm.
Coinbase or a Paxos or a Zero Hash or an Anchorage. These are all digital native firms that this is their business. They're enabling these capabilities in the same way that a lot of these regional or community banks might use a banking stack like FIS. So we're
Mm.
seeing really a lot of the players in this space be both a tech provider and a service provider for access to crypto in a safe and secure and risk managed way. That's enabling a lot of these firms where, for most of the banks that are focused on local communities, they don't have a digital native, a blockchain engineering team and
Mm.
a team that's able to launch these types of products and services.
Mm. So I hear you saying, like, first start with the demand. What are your customers doing? What do they need, even if they're not doing it?
Yeah.
And then think about how you might be able to meet that demand in a compelling way. And that could mean partnerships. That could mean building something on your own, which maybe is unlikely. And there are lots of different ways that you could do that: stablecoin, crypto, and then other things that might be more relevant to a specific audience.
Yeah.
And I love that's a question you deal with every day.
Well, one of the other things is a
Yeah.
lot of these firms, if it is a more local community focused bank, they don't really offer access to investment products. And some
Mm.
of them want to, and they might be partnering with firms in the space to do that. But one of the big trends we're seeing alongside payments, remittances, typical just holding cryptocurrency is tokenized assets. So
Mm,
RWA is the acronym to real world assets, but it's focused on tokenization, taking an asset and having a structure that's both legal and technical to be able to put that asset on the blockchain and allow it to move freely in the way that you would see stablecoin moving around the world today. One of
mm,
one of the things that as an American, you kind of realize how naive and how lucky we are. When I was out in Hong Kong getting paid in Hong Kong dollars, two big pain points. Once I got those Hong Kong dollars, I needed an investment account in Hong Kong, and I couldn't invest in my usual US ETFs and stocks unless they were listed locally or unless I had, a couple $1 million in a private bank account.
mm,
That's a very basic problem, and not just for low income folks, but you think about fractional shares is it's only recently kind of become a thing. Crypto makes that very simple,
mm,
and allowing access in markets where there is no major good exchange, there aren't access to reliable major market investment stocks. You've got to invest in what's on the local exchange. That's crazy. Um, so I was, remitting money back to the US to go put it in my investment account in the US. But when you think about the growing economies all around the world and the access to, if they want to invest in some of the best companies that are out there and they
mhm,
can't, that's incredibly frustrating. At that time, Binance, which is one of the largest global crypto exchanges, actually launched tokenized equities before it was allowed. So that got shut down pretty quickly. But you
mm.
see announcements popping up now. Robinhood is starting to offer this for European customers. Coinbase and Kraken
Oh,
are two big crypto exchanges that are announcing this under the rules that are coming out in the US. So I think it's a
mm,
very interesting trend that's really going to democratize investment access, fractional investment access.
mm.
So you can say, Bitcoin and ETH, and they're very interesting, but they are still pretty volatile. But when you think about, I can buy shares of Google that I couldn't do if I'm sitting in a market that I don't have access, that's also very interesting.
Mm. Yeah, I can see how that would be really compelling. And that's a use case I didn't even mention at the beginning. I'd love to end with more of a selfish question, taking advantage of the fact that you're here. I'm sure your time is very expensive. And so I'm thrilled I get to ask this. About a year ago, I had the head of the Crypto Council for Innovation on the
Mm,
podcast. And I asked what Women's World Banking and other organizations like ours that are supporting financial institutions, that are advocating for institutions reaching new markets, like, what should we be doing to get into this space? And she said, like, actually, it's so early days. Maybe you shouldn't move into the crypto space. The risks of exclusion are still high. So, like, wait and see. So, that was about a year ago, a
mm.
little more than a year ago. So, what would your answer be to the same question today? Your advice to me as a person who focuses on women's access to financial services?
I think it's the opposite.
Let's hear
um,
it. Let's hear it.
and to be fair, we've seen a total sea change with the availability of regulation that helps firms in this space not get shut down, have clear rules of the road, and be able to run their businesses in a way that says, I'm following the law, I am compliant, I've got my risk management teams here supporting all of these activities. The U.S. admin change definitely supported that, and I
Mm,
think what I would say is that most folks in this space potentially before that were worried that the investment of time to learn about this space wasn't worth it, that it might go
mm,
away. Um, and I think we are in a very interesting time right now where I can tell you the amount of clients that we're working with that are enabling access and capabilities in this space is significant. And I would hate for women to have the wrong perception of this space or to have a perception from 2 years ago or from some bad market actors previously that would prevent them from being curious and learning more and exposing themselves to this space. I think there's opportunities, everything from working in this space and building technology in this space, launching companies in this space. Women have a unique perspective about what this technology can do and where it can be offered. And I think it'd be a shame to not have more women participating on that journey.
Hmm. I love that. Well, that's a really good note to end on. Becky, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation as much as I did. I always love to end with a few of my own personal notes. My first is to start with the need. I think one of the reasons this space kind of turned me off at the very beginning was just so much focus on how cool the technology was, which it is very cool. But low income women in emerging markets don't really care about the specifics of how Bitcoin works, like how you do the math to log on the node and make the transaction or whatever that process looks like. They care about what they can do with it. And so starting with the need, women's need for privacy, women's need to move money around, women's need to build assets is a really important principle to keep in mind. The second, if I were to put out a wanted ad, it would be like, wanted more women thinkers, more women investors in this space. It has been like a very male dominated space. And I think more women coming into the space will only improve the conversation and only make the space better. And then finally, there were lots of use cases that Becky brought up that I hadn't even thought of myself. But it's just like, it seems like there is a lot of potential here. And I'll be watching the space to see how that potential kind of scales up, what portability of these models looks like in different economies. And yeah, I'd love to just like have a crystal ball and look a year into the future and see where we are. Maybe we'll check in with another crypto episode a year from now. Actually, watch this space because Women's World Banking has an upcoming white paper on new technologies and their role in inclusion, including cryptocurrency. So we'll have a lot more to say in a few months. And once that comes out, I'll come back to the YouTube page and make sure we put a link to that white paper in. And if you found today's discussion valuable, don't forget to subscribe, to rate, and to share with your friends or colleagues, just like my mom does. She shares it with her friends. And feel free to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform, but only if you liked it. Just kidding. Your feedback matters so much to me. It'll help me and all of our team bring you content that resonates. So please stay engaged, stay informed, and we'll see you next time.